Hey, what's up everybody? It's Rex here with Carpentry Plus. Today we're going to be talking about sanding. So we've got a set of cabinets in the shop here ready for that step. So this is where our random orbit sanders get a good workout, as well as our hands. We've also got our doors ready, and we'll be running those through the drum sander, as well as some additional sanding after that step. Alright, so when sanding our face frames, we're going to use a random orbit sander and basically just go over this whole thing, making sure we're getting all these joints flushed up nice and smooth. But we don't want to over sand those areas. We want to make sure we give the whole thing a good, even, thorough sanding. So we sometimes will sand our face frames before assembly. In some ways there's advantages to that. The reason I didn't do it here is because many of these cabinets are large. We're assembling these cabinets, face down. We build our cabinet onto the face frame, and then just generally moving them around. They're big and cumbersome, and so they have a tendency sometimes to get a little bit of scuffed up, some scratches, nicks and dings, and I find it's better to just wait on the sanding until we're basically ready. Fabrication is completely done on these, and they're ready to go into paint, and then we'll sand our faces, get those all good and ready to go. So that's the reasoning for that. One more thing to note here, we do have a hose hooked up, connected to our vacuum back here. So we're trying to catch as much of this dust as we can, keep it contained and out of our lungs. All right, so now that we've got our face sanded, we're ready to break all these edges. So we want to just ease all these sharp edges. That'll help our paint adhere, and it'll make the cabinets a little bit more durable, so we don't have those sharp edges that are kind of fragile. So anyway, I'll use a sanding block. I got a 180 grit paper wrapped on this, as well as just some hand sandpaper for a few areas, but so we'll just go at it and give it ease all these edges. All right, so when breaking these edges, this is one of those areas of woodworking where your hands are your best tool that you have. So most of this, you can't really see much of a difference. I know I definitely can't zoom in for you and get you a good view of what we've done here with the breaking of these edges, but it's all about feel. So when that edge is real sharp, you know that that edge isn't going to hold up, paint's not going to stick to it, but you hit that with a little sand, just a couple light passes, and it just eases that edge just enough. So anyhow, we're using our hands to feel all this, so every bit of it gets, kind of gets rubbed down. All right, moving on to our doors. We're going to do a bulk of that sanding here at the drum sander. This has been a great addition to the shop. Really speeds this process up quite a bit. Probably looking at maybe one pass per side, maybe two. It's not very labor intensive, so you're not, standing there bent over the sanding table with a sander trying to get all these sanded. You just stand here, casually feed them through the machine, and let the machine do the work. Try to give you a look what it looks like as the piece goes in.
As it comes out, ready for the next step.
Okay, so that worked out about like I had hoped. So one pass per side. They're all nice and smooth. We'll take them from here back over to the sanding table. Hit them all with the 120 grit with a random orbit sander. So now we're back over here at the sanding table, and we're gonna hit all these. We're gonna hit all four sides, and then the front and the back with the random orbit sander. We got 120 grit paper in here. We also use 120 grit on the face frames. All right, so just like with our face frames, once we're completed with the random orbit sanding, we'll go through, sand all of our edges, break the edges with sanding block, hand sandpaper to ease those edges. We also, with these doors, hit the outside front and back with a 1/16 inch round over. I didn't show that since this is a sanding video, but we did that also. All right, so our next section for this sanding video, we're going to be sanding down our desktop. So I've got two seams here. So I'm going to start on those seams to get those nice and flat. And then I'll start sanding, probably kind of go section by section and just give them a nice thorough once over. I'm going to start with 120. So we're starting on the seams first, and then we will methodically work section by section to get the rest of this top sanded down. We're ready to make our final round of sanding on this large butcher block desktop. So we will go around and we've eased the edges, 1/8 inch round over all the way around it. So we'll hit that with a little bit of hand sandpaper, and then we'll give this whole thing a good once over with 150 grit sanding disc with a random orbit sander. So we ended up using our 3x4 electric sander to work these edges. Hand sanding was a little bit too slow. Now we'll move on to that final pass with the random orbit sander with 150 grit paper on it, and methodically work our way section by section to complete the sanding on this large desktop. All right, so now that we've got all our cabinetry, doors, shelves, all of our parts primed, they've dried overnight, and we're ready to sand that primer. So, couple things to note here. So when we apply that first coat of finish, almost every type of finish, whether it's primer and paint, or polyurethane, or water-based poly, or varnish, lacquers, pretty much all of it, that first coat is going to raise the grain of the wood. And when it raises the grain, and then that paint dries, or that finish, now that grain is up and it's dried and it's hard. And so then no matter how smooth something was to begin with, that grain is going to be raised and it's going to be rough. And you got to sand it at that point. So generally speaking, we don't need to continue sanding between all the additional coats. You may choose to, depending on what kind of finish you're doing and what kind you know what, the quality of the finish and all that stuff. And again, generally speaking, when we're sanding wood, I like to use actual sandpaper. I feel like these pads of different sorts, these foam pads, I feel like that they don't cut the wood fibers as well as a real sandpaper. On the flip side, when we're sanding our primer, when we're sanding our finishes, I don't like to use the real sandpaper. It generally wants to gum up, get clogged up, and then prove ineffective. So we're going to use these sanding blocks, these foam blocks. I got these pads here. This is basically the same pad that will go on our sander. So we'll use a combination of all these to do all of our sanding. So we'll try to do, you know, 99% of it with the electric sander. Does a real good job. However, we can't get in all the little corners and all the little details. So, you know, on the inside of our door frames and things, we need to get in there and do that by hand. So, all right, let's get into the action here. You can see we're using our 3x4 electric sander to do the bulk of it, using the small pads to get the details, and we're dust vac and everything, putting it back on the rack. This is quite a lengthy process, but it's a very important process. I think I've got about 3 or 4 hours at least doing all this. And again, it's lengthy, but it's important. It's a vital step in the process. As this process continued to drag on, I started feeling kind of guilty that I was having all the fun all to myself. So that's when I called on my son to come out and help, and just to let him, you know, enjoy this with his dad. All right, so that pretty well wraps up our sanding video. Just to recap, we sanded our face frames with the random orbit sanders, and we've actually got 2 of them. One's a 3/16 orbit, one's a 3/32 orbit for more finish detail sanding. We sanded our doors on the drum sander, and then again with the random orbit sanders. We sanded our butcher block desktop with the random orbit sanders, stepping down in grit, and we used our 3x4 electric sander for sanding the primer coat in the paint room. So those are just to cover the sanding, like 4 of the major aspects of sanding that we do here. And then of course, aside from the electric sanders, we also use some various different pads for sanding. And like I always tell people, the most important tool that you have when you're sanding is your hands, your sense of feel. So with that, I'll wrap up. Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. Hopefully you're finding the videos useful, and thanks again.